Good afternoon. I can do a little better here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Again, my name is Metz. I'm a deputy chief with the Seattle Police Department, and I oversee our operations, which includes patrol, our investigations, our special operations, which is our K-9 mounted harbor, SWAT, traffic, a whole bunch of things like that. I've been on the department for almost 30 years, and I can tell you in that 30 years I've seen a lot. But first of all, real quick, I have my two daughters back here, and I strategically bring them because usually when I come to community meetings, people are a lot nicer to me when I got my daughters. But the thing that I'm reminded of in looking at them right now is that, you know, when they were born and when you're thinking about when I was thinking about having kids 18 years ago, you know, you were thinking about, okay, I got to teach my kids traffic safety and how to cross the street safe and, you know, how to, you know, do this and that. I never dreamed that I was going to have conversations with them about what to do in the event someone brought a gun to school, or if they went to a house and someone brought a gun out into the open, and the kind of reactions that they need to make sure that they take. So our world has changed. Our world has really changed a lot. And in my almost 30 years, of law enforcement experience, I have probably responded to well over 200 shooting incidents in our city. Many of those homicides, fortunately, as Councilmember Burgess said, we have one of the best trauma centers in the country right here in Seattle. And if it were not for Harborview and the great Seattle Fire Department medics, we probably would have a much higher homicide rate because fortunately people are able to get to the hospital quickly and get treated. But a lot of the victims that I've seen over the last 30 years, most of them have been young people. I would say anywhere between the ages of, on average, 15 to 25. But the amount of young people below the age of 15 has just been heartbreaking. And this is carnage that I've personally seen. This is carnage that our officers see every single day when the tones come out about an officer or a shooting that's occurred, and our medics see as well. And some of those high-profile incidents that I personally responded to has been some of the ones that have been mentioned here today. Cafe Racer, I was one of the first there to respond. I was actually the commander that day. The Jewish Federation shooting, I was the commander at that scene. The Capitol Hill Massacre, many of us remember, I was the commander at that one. The shooting of our own officer Tim Brenton, who was gunned down on Capitol Hill, which is Central District. And then I actually even was asked to respond to the 4 Lakewood officers who were gunned down on that fateful Thanksgiving weekend. And I can't help but think that if the powers that be, the ones who really have the power to make the decisions, to pass these laws, especially those who seem to be resistant to a lot of the reasonable changes that we've been asking for, have seen even a quarter of the carnage that we've seen personally, that I've seen over the years. If they had to actually go to a person's house and tell that person that their loved one is never coming home again, and knowing that that message that you are about to deliver is going to change a life forever, maybe, just maybe, people would think differently. Because I think sometimes when people think about reasonable gun laws, they're not thinking about what the impacts to human life, the impacts to personal life is, because they've never really even had to deal with it. They see it from the outside, they read it in the news, so for them it's a very sterile kind of environment. But for many people, and I think we all know folks and have seen folks across the country who might have been staunch supporters of certain types of gun freedoms, that when they have personally become victimized or have had loved ones victimized by weapons, their view changes, and because they realize the dangers that these guns present. What I've also seen in the shootings, most of the shootings that I've responded to over the years, is that most of the guns used in these situations are either stolen, they've been reported stolen, or they are stolen and they have not been reported stolen. So meaning we find the gun, we realize that the gun is registered to a certain person, but it's not listed as stolen in our database, and we go and we talk to the person who it's registered, and we find out, oh yeah, that gun was stolen out of my car about a year ago. Why didn't you report it? Well, you know, I didn't think it was important to report, or I was embarrassed that my gun was stolen, or whatever the case may be. We also find that a majority of the shooters in a lot of these situations would be considered ineligible to carry a firearm. They're either underage, they either have a felony record, they have mental illness that by court standards would keep them from being able to possess a weapon. What's interesting in the shootings that I described for you earlier, the ones I personally responded to, some of those, is that the only one out of all those shootings, the only one that actually involved an assault rifle was the shooting of Officer Timothy Brenton. The rest were actually handguns. So I get a little bit more passionate. I know a lot of times people will look at the assault rifle issue, but for me it's guns in general, because we know guns can kill. And so what we've seen, especially with Captain Racer and others, is these were handguns that were used. And as a law enforcement professional, obviously my job is to make sure that the community is protected, it's to make sure that property is protected, that lives are protected. But our job also is to make sure that we protect the Constitution, including the Second Amendment. So it's not about that we're here to say, restrict guns, take guns off the street, as far as, not allowing people to be armed. It's about reasonable gun laws. And when we're talking about reasonable gun laws, we're talking about universal background checks. As Councilmember Burgess and Councilmember Bagshaw said earlier, I was absolutely amazed when we did our gun buyback program, the number of transactions that were going on around the periphery that we really could do nothing about. Think about it. I can go to the local gun store, I can try to purchase a Glock, and I have to go through a universal background check. But if Councilmember Burgess calls me and says, "Hey Nick, do you want to buy my gun?" It's just a personal sale between he and I. That's it. There's no reporting, there's no background check required or anything. So what's the incentive for someone who knows that they're probably ineligible to carry a gun to actually try to buy a gun at a drugstore, at a gun store? It may get to that point, we never know. At a gun store. So those are issues right there that we're very passionate about. And frankly, just safe gun keeping. People having gun safes or trigger locks. This last year and a half, we just, in our own region, the number of gun-related accidents that have occurred. How did you describe it, Councilman?
Unintentional.
The unintentionals has just been staggering. Young kids finding loose guns in cars and then ended up hurting themselves. We all remember the case in Bremerton where the young boy took the gun to school and belonged to his parents and shot the girl. Unfortunately, she survived. But these are just the kinds of things that we're seeing quite a bit of. So I wanted to put out there just kind of more from a personal standpoint what we're seeing every day, because the general public doesn't see the carnage. You read about it in the newspaper, you might see a little bit on the news, but until you actually show up at a scene and you're actually seeing the bodies, you're actually seeing the blood, you're seeing the loved ones absolutely grieving. It changes you, and it makes you look at life just a little bit different. So, with that, I know there may be some questions that folks will have later, but I just wanted to say thank you, number one, for inviting me here today, Jessica, but also thank all of you for thinking that this topic is important enough in your lives and in the lives of our community to be here today, and rather than just sitting back and waiting for others to make a change, you're here willing to help make that change. So thank you.